These events to remember the hostages and to take action to try and get the hostages released are incredibly important. I can't tell you how important they are, and I can't also tell you how important they are to the people in Israel. I've spent most of the last 6 months in Israel, and they see what goes on in this country and other countries around the world, and they have enormous appreciation for the solidarity that you show in events like this. I'd also like to take a moment just to think about not just those people who were so brutally slaughtered, tortured and abused on the 7th of October 6 months ago, but also the extraordinary IDF soldiers that have been killed. The extraordinary IDF soldiers that have been killed in action on the ground in Gaza. 260 of them now. And in the last day, we heard news of a further 4 that were killed in Gaza. And I'm going to read a message that was sent by one of those 4 soldiers before he died, of course. It's from Sergeant Reef Harush, who was 20 years of age, killed yesterday. And he said, "I'm ready to sacrifice my life and for my family, that they may sit quietly and peacefully, and that they know there is a huge army that will watch over them as long as we are on our feet." Those were pretty much his last words. A brave young man. I'd also like to pay tribute to everybody in here, and I know there are several in here who've served in the IDF. It's always, for me as a former British soldier who's worked closely with the IDF over many years, it's always a tremendous honour to be present in the same place as IDF soldiers. So congratulations to you. We've heard a lot today about, particularly from Dame Maureen, about the way that the world treats this conflict. And this is, of course, no accident. What we're facing here in the West, in particular, in Europe, in the UK, in the US, other countries, is not just propaganda. What we're facing is a very sophisticated, highly organised, long-term political warfare campaign, which has been going on, this current campaign, since around about 1964, originally orchestrated by the Soviet Union against Israel, and it continues to this day and has grown in strength and power. And that campaign includes, of course, as all political warfare includes propaganda, a large part of it, but there's much more than propaganda, there's far greater sophistication. And as Dame Maureen mentioned, the Palestinian Solidarity Mob, as she called it, which is also known as the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, I prefer her words, mob, much more fitting. But the PSC is a fundamental element of this. The PSC is not the whole thing, but it's a big part of it, it's an important part of it. And it's been fighting against Israel and against Jews in the diaspora since its creation. Almost immediately after the atrocities of the 7th of October, the PSC publicly stood with Hamas and asked people to support Hamas. The same day, by the way, that the news came out of Israel. That is the PSC for you. And their campaign, and the campaign of others associated with them in the UK and elsewhere, has resulted in the distortions, the twisting of reality that we see on our television screens or on our Twitter feeds or anywhere else that we receive this bilge water. We see every single day. I won't even give the dignity of a significant mention to the genocide claims made by South Africa, supported by others, because they are so obscene, accusing Israel, the Jewish state, of apartheid, when itself, I beg your pardon, of genocide. It gets accused of apartheid as well, when itself was the victims of genocide. Hamas is a genocidal organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel and of Jews everywhere. They've twisted casualty statistics. They've made you think, I'm sure they haven't made you think, but they've made many people think that Israel is uniquely evil because a large number of Palestinian civilians have been killed in Gaza. It is the truth, they have, we don't know how many, but a lot have been killed. Unfortunately, that is what happens in every war. The ratios, and it's horrible to reduce human life to statistics, but the ratios of civilian deaths to combatant casualties are far, far lower in this war than any war that's been prosecuted by the United States, the United Kingdom, or other allied countries in Afghanistan, Iraq, or anywhere else. I was on the ground several times in Gaza during this ground war with the IDF. I've seen firsthand exactly how they fight. They fight with incredible effectiveness, bravery, and great skill. You can be deeply proud of those gallant young men and women who are fighting today. I was in Gaza in a command group meeting led by 3 IDF generals discussing a forthcoming operation in Khan Yunis a few weeks back. The meeting lasted about an hour, and in that hour, 20 minutes were allocated to working out how to carry out an attack against a critical mass target while minimizing the likelihood of deaths of refugees who'd taken refuge in a nearby school. That was the extent of their focus on this, and I won't go into more details about the mechanisms, but what I would say to you, for certain, and I've fought in many different campaigns with many different armies, and I would say to you for absolute certain that no army in history has ever taken the steps that the IDF takes, the sophistication, the effectiveness of minimizing civilian casualties on the battlefield than the IDF. No other army. This is not understood, of course. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes by ignorance. Of course, there's a great deal of ignorance out there. We've all seen it on our television screens and elsewhere. But warfare is very, very complicated. And it's very hard for people who haven't experienced it to really understand the difficulties and the complexities. And that leads me on to the horrific killing of 7 aid workers from World Central Kitchen in Gaza recently. It was a terrible event. The IDF have said that they were culpable. They've said that mistakes were made. They've disciplined people who were involved in it. They've put in place measures to try and make sure it doesn't happen again or anything like it. President Biden is outraged by it. Outraged. It is outrageous that it happened, but this is war. War is bloody, it's violent, it's dangerous. It's as General Sherman in the US said, it is hell. And it is hell, I can tell you that as someone who's experienced it. And this is the sort of thing that does happen in war. In 2021, August 2021, when President Biden was pulling Allied forces out of Afghanistan, the US launched a drone strike against a against a Taliban terrorist cell. That drone strike killed an aid worker and 9 of his family, including 7 children. Like the events on the 7th, the event with the World Central Kitchen, that drone strike mistook aid worker and his family for terrorists based on incorrect identification of a vehicle. Very similar circumstances. I don't remember President Biden being outraged by that. They've distorted the humanitarian aid situation. Of course, there are people suffering huge deprivation inside Gaza, and I'm sure we all pity them enormously. There are some terrible circumstances and situations there, but there is no starvation, there is no famine, and there's nothing even approaching it. I've seen videos, genuine videos, of people throwing American airdrop rations away because they didn't like the taste of them. Israel has facilitated the delivery of 1 year's worth of aid into Gaza in the last 6 months. 1 year's worth of the need aid. They've twisted the recent Israeli attack against IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, terrorist leaders in Syria. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations accused Israel of breaking international law by carrying out that strike. Many other people have followed suit. It was perfectly lawful, it was perfectly proper. It may or may not have been on diplomatic premises. That is irrelevant. It's not against the Vienna Convention, which people suggest. Many people, including the UN, have suggested, because the Vienna Convention only applies to the protection of diplomatic facilities from the host nation. It doesn't apply to two nations at war, and it doesn't apply to a nation defending itself from attack against terrorists who are doing everything they can to attack Israel from Lebanon, which is what these particular commanders are doing. What is the effect of all this pressure that we see delivered in respect of what are not war crimes? I've not seen any war crime. I'm not aware of any war crime from all the detail I've seen that's been committed by the IDF in Gaza. What is the effect of people accusing them of that? What's the effect of people like President Biden or Foreign Secretary Cameron telling Israel not to destroy the remnants of Hamas inside Rafah? The effect is to embolden Hamas. That's what it does. The chances of releasing the hostages, of arranging a deal, which negotiations are going on now, to release the hostages, the chances are reduced by the emboldenment that's given by this international pressure. And despite Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron's recent, what I would say is indiscretions, but that's probably too light a word, against Israel, I'm very pleased to hear today that Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, confirmed that the British government has no information that Israel is carrying out war crimes or breaking international law. He confirmed that Britain will continue to deliver weapons to Israel, even though what we give to Israel is pretty much irrelevant compared to what they give to us, which is highly relevant. And but it's a very important message. It would be a very, very bad blow against Israel if Britain imposed an arms embargo on Israel. So what can we all do about it? What can our role be in this? This is political warfare, as I mentioned. We should fight political warfare with political warfare. It is possible now, and there was a report published today by David Collier of I don't know how many of you know him, but he's a British Jew who campaigns feverishly in support of Israel. A report by him which advocated placing the PSC at the top of the list of Britain's new anti-extremism legislation. That would be a very, very important thing to do. If I might suggest, humbly, as I said, as a Goy, if I might suggest that those of you who have political connections, use them to get this pushed forward, to get the PSC taken down. Pressure I always lose track of who does what in the Jewish community, but I think you've got boards of deputies and Jewish leadership councils and numerous other important bodies. Pressure them to push the government to take this action. I think it's very important, as well as the work those of you, I'm sure most of you do, in trying to keep the hostages, to keep the memory alive of the hostages, make sure we don't forget them. Also, you can try and go on to the offensive against the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign and others like them. Final thing, and I appreciate I've spoken far too long, for which I apologise, but I do love the sound of my own voice. The final thing, and Ollie quoted from Winston Churchill. It's pretty much mandatory to quote from Winston Churchill these days. But the final thought I want to leave you with is what we're doing, what we're engaged in, all of us here in this room and elsewhere. It's a terrible situation, one of the worst that I can remember ever in any conflict anywhere in the world. It is a terrible situation. But it's also, for those of us who are willing to stand up in support of Israel and in support of our own Jewish community, it is also an honour to do that. It's a tremendous honour. Churchill said in 1941, it was actually the same speech that Ollie quoted, Never Give In. He was speaking at his old school, which is a minor public school called Eton. You may have heard of it. In 1941, and this was, when I read his words, bear in mind what was happening in Britain at the time. It was before the US came into the war. There was no obvious path to victory against the Nazis, with Britain standing pretty much alone. 1 million houses in London had been destroyed or seriously damaged by Nazi bombing. 40,000 civilians had been killed since the war began 2 years earlier. And Churchill at this point said to his school, because he'd heard someone speaking about these are dark days, the school song included the words, these are dark days. And he said, do not let us speak of darker days. Let us speak rather of sterner days. These are not dark days, these are great days, the greatest days our country has ever lived. And we must all thank God that we've been allowed, each of us according to our station, to play a part in making these days memorable in the history of our race. I think the same, ladies and gentlemen, is true today. I would leave you with one further thought, which is, I believe we've got a great deal to learn from Israel about how to stand up for ourselves when we're attacked. And Israel is showing us the way, and we all need to learn from that. I believe that Israel will emerge from this conflict strengthened, with its reputation very firmly intact, and with military leaders from around the world going to Israel to find out exactly how they did it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.